Sunday, March the 1st. Quinquagesima, St. David's Day. I took some sugar to Blossom before I did my paper round. It brought me closer to Pandora somehow. Have strained my back because of carrying all the Sunday supplements. Took the leftover Sunday People home as a present to my mother, but she said it was only fit for lining the dustbin. Got my £2.06 for 6 mornings. It is slave labour. And I have to give Barry Kent half of it. Mr. Cherry said he had a complaint from number 69 Elmtree Avenue that they didn't get a Guardian yesterday. Mr. Cherry sent a Daily Express round with his apologies, but Pandora's father brought it back to the shop and said he would rather go without. Didn't bother reading the papers today. I am fed up with papers. Had chow mein and bean sprouts for Sunday dinner. Mr. Lucas came round when my father had gone to visit Grandma. He was wearing a plastic daffodil in his sports jacket. My spots have completely gone. It must be the early morning air. Monday, March the 2nd. My mother has just come into my room and said she had something awful to tell me. I sat up in bed and put a dead serious expression on my face, just in case she'd got 6 months to live or she'd been caught shoplifting or something. She fiddled with the curtains, dropped cigarette ash all over my Concorde model, and started mumbling on about adult relationships and life being complicated, and how she must find herself. She said she was fond of me. Fond! And would hate to hurt me. And then she said that for some women, marriage was like being in prison. Then she went out. Marriage is nothing like being in prison. Women are let out every day to go to the shops and stuff, and quite a lot go to work. I think my mother is being a bit melodramatic. Finished Animal Farm. It is dead symbolic. I cried when Boxer was taken to the vets. From now on, I shall treat pigs with the contempt they deserve. I am boycotting pork of all kinds. Tuesday, March the 3rd. Shrove Tuesday. I gave Barry Kent his protection money today. I don't see how there can be a God. If there was, surely he wouldn't let people like Barry Kent walk about menacing intellectuals. Why are bigger youths unpleasant to smaller youths? Perhaps their brains are easily worn out with all the extra work they have to do making bigger bones and stuff. Or it could be that the big youths have got brain damage because of all the sport they play. Or perhaps big youths just like menacing and fighting. When I go to university, I may study the problem. I will have my thesis published, and I will send a copy to Barry Kent. Perhaps by then he will have learnt to read. My mother had forgotten that today was Pancake Day. I reminded her at 11 p.m. I'm sure she burnt them deliberately. I will be 14 in 1 month's time. Wednesday, March the 4th, Ash Wednesday. Had a nasty shock this morning. Took my empty paper sack back to Mr. Cherry's newsagent's and saw Mr. Lucas looking at those magazines on the top shelf. I stood behind the Mills and Boon rack and distinctly saw him choose Big and Bouncy, pay for it, and leave the shop with it hidden inside his coat. Big and Bouncy is extremely indecent. It is full of disgusting pictures. My mother should be informed. Thursday, March the 5th. My father got his car back from the garage today. He was cleaning it and gloating over it for a whole 2 hours. I noticed that the stick-on waving hand I bought him for Christmas was missing from the rear window. I told him he ought to complain to the garage, but he said he didn't want to make a fuss. We went to my grandma's to test drive the car. She gave us a cup of Bovril and a piece of yucky seed cake. She didn't ask how my mother was. She said my father was looking thin and pale and needed feeding up. She told me that Bert Baxter had been thrown out of the Evergreens because of his bad behaviour at Skegness. The coach was waiting for 2 hours for him at the coach station. A search party was sent out to look in the pubs. Then Bert came back, drunk but alone, and another search party was sent out to look for the first search party. In the end, the police had to be sent for, and they took hours to round up all the pensioners and get them in the coach. My grandma said the journey back was a nightmare. All the pensioners kept falling out. With each other, not out of the coach. Bert Baxter was reciting a dirty poem about an Eskimo, and Mrs. Harriman had a funny turn and had to have her corsets loosened. Grandma said 2 pensioners had passed on since the outing. She blamed Bert Baxter and said he as good as murdered them. But I think it was more likely that the cold wind at Skegness killed them off. I said, Bert Baxter is not so bad when you get to know him. She said she didn't understand why the good Lord took my granddad and left scum like Baxter. Then she pulled her lips tight and dabbled her eyes with a handkerchief, so we left. My mother was out when we got home. She has joined some women's group. Heard my father say good night to the car. He must be cracking up. Friday, March the 6th. New moon. Mr. Cherry is very pleased with my work, and he has raised my wages by 2.5 pence an hour. He also offered me the Corporation Row evening round, but I declined his offer. Corporation Row is where the council put all the bad tenants. Barry Kent lives at number 13. Mr. Cherry gave me 2 back copies of Big and Bouncy. He told me not to tell my mother, as if I would. I have put them under my mattress. Intellectuals like me are allowed to be interested in sex. It is ordinary people like Mr. Lucas who should be ashamed of themselves. Phoned social services today and asked about a home help for Bert Baxter. I told a lie and said I was his grandson. They are sending a social worker to see him on Monday. Used my father's library tickets to get War and Peace out. I have lost my own. Took dog to meet Blossom. They got on well. Saturday, March the 7th. After paper round, went back to bed and stayed there all morning reading Big and Bouncy. Felt like I have never felt before. Went to Sainsbury's with my mother and father, but the women in there reminded me of Big and Bouncy, even the ones over 30. My mother said I looked hot and bothered and sent me back to the multi-storey car park to keep the dog company. The dog already had company. It was barking and whining so loudly that a crowd of people were standing around saying, "The poor thing," and "How cruel to leave it tied up in such a fashion." The dog had twisted its collar on the gear lever, and its eyes were bulging out of its head. When it saw me, it tried to jump up and nearly killed itself. I tried to explain to the people that I was going to be a vet when I grew up, but they wouldn't listen and started to say things about the RSPCA. The car was locked, so I was forced to break the little window open and unlock the door by putting my hand through. The dog went mad with joy when I untangled him, so the people went away. But my father didn't go mad with joy when he saw the damage. He went mad with rage. He threw the Sainsbury's bags down, broke the eggs, squashed the cakes, and drove home too fast. Nobody said anything on the way home, and only the dog was smiling. Finished War and Peace. It was quite good. Sunday, March the 8th, first in Lent. My mother has gone to a woman's workshop on assertiveness training. Men aren't allowed. I asked my father what assertiveness training is. He said, "God knows, but whatever it is, it's bad news for me." We had boil-in-the-bag cod in butter sauce and oven-cooked chips for Sunday dinner, followed by tinned peaches and dream topping. My father opened a bottle of white wine and let me have some. I don't know much about wine, but it seemed a pleasant enough vintage. We watched a film on television, then my mother came home and started bossing us around. She said, "The worm has turned," and "things are going to be different around here," and things like that. Then she went into the kitchen and started making a chart dividing all the housework into 3. I pointed out to her that I already had a paper round to do, an old-age pensioner to look after, and a dog to feed, as well as my schoolwork. But she didn't listen. She put the chart on the wall and said, "We start tomorrow." Monday, March the 9th, Commonwealth Day. Cleaned toilet, washed basin and bath before doing my paper round. Came home, made breakfast, put washing in machine, went to school. Gave Barry Kent his menaces money, went to Bert Baxter's. Waited for social worker, who didn't come, had school dinner. Had domestic science, made apple crumble, came home. Vacuumed hall, lounge and breakfast room. Peeled potatoes, chopped up cabbage, cut finger, rinsed blood off cabbage. Put chops under grill, looked in cookery book for a recipe for gravy. Made gravy. Strained lumps out with a colander. Set table, served dinner, washed up. Put burnt saucepans into soak. Got washing out of machine. Everything blue, including white underwear and handkerchiefs. Hung washing on clothes horse. Fed dog. Iron PE kit, clean shoes. Did homework. Took dog for a walk, had bath. Cleaned bath. Made 3 cups of tea. Washed cups up. Went to bed. Just my luck to have an assertive mother. Tuesday, March the 10th. Prince Edward born, 1964. Why couldn't I have been born Prince Edward, and Prince Edward been born Adrian Mole? I am treated like a serf. Wednesday, March the 11th. Dragged myself to school after doing paper round and housework. My mother wouldn't give me a note excusing me from games, so I left my PE kit at home. I just couldn't face running about in the cold wind. That sadist Mr. Jones made me run all the way home to fetch my PE kit. The dog must have followed me out of the house because when I got to the school gate, it was there before me. I tried to shut the dog out, but it squeezed through the railings and followed me into the playground. I ran into the changing rooms and left the dog outside, but I could hear its loud bark echoing around the school. I tried to sneak into the playing fields, but the dog saw me and followed behind. Then it saw the football and joined in the lesson. The dog is dead good at football. Even Mr. Jones was laughing, until the dog punctured the ball. Mr. Scruton, the pop-eyed headmaster, saw everything from his window. He ordered me to take the dog home. I told him I would miss my sitting for school dinners, but he said it would teach me not to bring pets to school. Mrs. Leach, the kitchen supervisor, did a very kind thing. She put my curry and rice, spotted dick and custard, into the oven to keep warm. Mrs. Leach doesn't like Mr. Scruton, so she gave me a large marrow bone to take home for the dog. Thursday, March the 12th. Woke up this morning to find my face covered in huge red spots. My mother said they were caused by nerves, but I am still convinced that my diet is inadequate. We have been eating a lot of boil-in-the-bag stuff lately. Perhaps I am allergic to plastic. My mother rang Dr. Gray's receptionist to make an appointment, but the earliest he can see me is next Monday. For all he knows, I could have Lassa fever and be spreading it all around the district. I told my mother to say that I was an emergency case, but she said I was overreacting as usual. She said a few spots didn't mean I was dying. I couldn't believe it when she said she was going to work as usual. Surely her child should come before her job. I rang my grandma, and she came round in a taxi and took me to her house and put me to bed. I am there now. It is very clean and peaceful. I am wearing my dead granddad's pyjamas. I have just had a bowl of barley and beef soup. It is my first proper nourishment for weeks. I expect there will be a row when my mother comes home and finds that I have gone. But frankly, my dear diary, I don't give a damn. Friday, March the 13th, moon's first quarter. The emergency doctor came to my grandma's last night at 11:30 p.m. He diagnosed that I am suffering from acne vulgaris. He said it was so common that it is regarded as a normal state of adolescence. He thought it was highly unlikely that I have got Lassa fever because I have not been to Africa this year. He told Grandma to take the disinfected sheets off the doors and windows. Grandma said she would like a second opinion. That was when the doctor lost his temper. He shouted in a very loud voice, "The lad has only got a few teenage spots, for Christ's sake." Grandma said she would complain to the medical council, but the doctor just laughed and went downstairs and slammed the door. My father came round before he went to work and brought my social studies homework and the dog. He said that if I was not out of bed when he got home at lunchtime, he would thrash me to within an inch of my life. He took my grandma into the kitchen and had a loud talk with her. I heard him saying, "Things are very bad between me and Pauline, and all we are arguing over now is who doesn't get custody of Adrian." Surely my father made a mistake. He must have meant who did get custody of me. So the worst has happened. My skin has gone to pot, and my parents are splitting up. Saturday, March the 14th. It is official. They are getting a divorce. Neither of them wants to leave the house, so the spare room is being turned into a bedsitter for my father. This could have a very bad effect on me. It could prevent me from being a vet. My mother gave me £5 this morning and told me not to tell my father. I bought some Bio Spot cream for my skin and the new Aber LP. I rang Mr. Cherry and said I had personal problems and would be unable to work for a few weeks. Mr. Cherry said that he knew that my parents were divorcing because my father had cancelled my mother's Cosmopolitan. My father gave me £5 and told me not to tell my mother. I spent some of it on buying some purple paper and envelopes so that the BBC will be impressed and read my poems. The rest of it will have to go on Barry Kent and his menaces money. I don't think anybody in the world can be as unhappy as me. If I didn't have my poetry, I would be a raving loony by now. Went out for a sad walk and took Pandora's horse £2 of cooking apples. Thought of a poem about Blossom. Wrote it down when I got back to the house where I live. Blossom, by Adrian Mole, aged nearly 14. Little brown horse, eating apples in a field. Perhaps one day my heart will be healed. I stroke the places Pandora has sat, wearing her jodhpurs and riding hat. Goodbye, brown horse. I turn and retreat. The rain and mud are wetting my feet. I have sent it to the BBC. I mark the envelope, urgent. Sunday, March the 15th, 2nd in Lent. The house is very quiet. My father sits in the spare room smoking, and my mother sits in the bedroom smoking. They're not eating much. Mr. Lucas has phoned my mother 3 times. All she says to him is, "Not yet, it's too early." Perhaps he has asked her to go to the pub for a drink and take her mind off her troubles. My father has put the stereo in his bedroom. He is playing his Jim Reeves records and staring out of the window. I took him a cup of tea, and he said, "Thanks, son," in a choked-up voice. My mother was looking at old letters in my father's handwriting when I took her tea in. She said, "Adrian, what must you think of us?" I said that Rick Lemon, the youth leader, thinks divorce is society's fault. My mother said, "Bugger society." I washed and ironed my school uniform ready for school tomorrow. I'm getting quite good at housework. My spots are so horrific that I can't bear to write about them. I will be the laughing stock at school. I am reading The Man in the Iron Mask. I know exactly how he feels. Monday, March the 16th. Went to school. Found it closed. In my anguish, I had forgotten that I am on holiday. Didn't want to go home, so went to see Bert Baxter instead. He said the social worker had been to see him and had promised to get Sabre a new kennel, but he can't have a home help. Bert, not Sabre. There must have been a full week's washing up in the sink again. Bert says he saves it for me because I make a good job of it. While I washed up, I told Bert about my parents getting a divorce. He said he didn't hold with divorce. He said he was married for 35 miserable years, so why should anybody else get away with it? He told me that he has got 4 children, and that none of them come to see him. 2 of them are in Australia, so they can't be blamed, but I think the other 2 should be ashamed of themselves. Bert showed me a photograph of his dead wife. It was taken in the days before they had plastic surgery. Bert told me that he was a hostler when he got married. A hostler is somebody doing things with horses, and didn't really notice that his wife looked like a horse until he left to work on the railways. I asked him if he would like to see a horse again. He said he would, so I took him to see Blossom. It took us ages to get there. Bert walks dead slow, and he kept having to sit down on garden walls, but we got there eventually. Bert said that Blossom was not a horse, she was a girl pony. He kept patting her and saying, "Who's a beauty then, eh?" Then Blossom went for a run about, so he sat down on the scrap car, and Bert had a Woodbine, and I had a Mars bar. Then we walked back to Bert's house. I went to the shops and bought a packet of Vesta chow mein and a butterscotch instant whip for our dinner, so Bert ate a decent meal for once. We watched Pebble Mill at 1. Then Bert showed me his old horse brushes and photographs of the big house where he worked when he was a boy. He said he was made into a communist when he was there, but he fell asleep before he could tell me why. Came home. Nobody was in, so I played my ABBA records at the highest volume until the deaf woman next door banged on the wall. Tuesday, March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day, bank holiday in Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. Looked at Big and Bouncy. Measured my thing. It was 11 centimetres. Mr. O'Leary, who lives across the road from us, was drunk at 10 o'clock in the morning. He got thrown out of the butcher's for singing. Wednesday, March the 18th. My mother and father are both speaking to solicitors. I expect they are fighting over who gets custody of me. I will be a tug-of-love child, and my picture will be in the newspapers. I hope my spots clear up before then. Thursday, March the 19th. Mr. Lucas has put his house up for sale. My mother says the asking price is £30,000. What will he do with all that money? My mother says he will buy another, bigger house. How stupid can you get? If I had £30,000, I would wander the world having experiences. I wouldn't take any real money with me, because I have read that most foreigners are thieves. Instead, I would have £3,000 worth of travellers' cheques sewn into my trousers. Before I set off, I would A. Send Pandora 3 dozen red roses. B. Pay a mercenary £50 to duff Barry Kent up. C. Buy the best racing bike in the world and ride it past Nigel's house. D. Order a massive crate of expensive dog food so that the dog is properly fed while I'm away. E. Buy a housekeeper for Bert Baxter. F. Offer my mother and father £1,000 each to stay together. When I came back from the world, I would be tall, brown, and full of ironical experiences, and Pandora would cry into her pillow at night because of the chance she missed to be Mrs. Pandora Mole. I would qualify to be a vet in record time, then I would buy a farmhouse. I would convert one room into a study so that I could have somewhere quiet to be intellectual in. I wouldn't waste £30,000 on buying a semi-detached house. Friday, March the 20th. First day of spring, full moon. It is the first day of spring. The council have chopped all the elms down in Elm Tree Avenue. Saturday, March the 21st. My parents are eating different things at different times, so I usually have 6 meals a day because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. The television is in my room now because they couldn't decide who it belongs to. I can lie in bed and watch the late-night horror. I am starting to get a bit suspicious about my mother's feelings towards Mr. Lucas. I found a note she had from him. It says, "Pauline, how much longer? For God's sake, come away with me. Yours forever, Bimbo." Although it was signed Bimbo, I know it was from Mr. Lucas because it was written on the back of his red electricity bill. My father should be informed. I have put the note under my mattress next to the Big and Bouncy magazines. Sunday, March the 22nd. 3rd in Lent. British summertime begins. It is my grandma's birthday today. She is 76, and looks it. I took her a card and a pot plant. It is called leopard lily. Its foreign name is Dieffenbachia. It had a plastic label stuck in the soil which said, "The sap in this plant is poisonous, so take care." My grandma asked me who chose the plant. I told her my mother did. My grandma is quite pleased that my parents are getting a divorce. She said that she always thought that my mother had a wanton streak in her, and that now she had been proved right. I didn't like to hear my mother being spoken of in such a way, so I came home. I pretended to Grandma that I had promised to meet a friend, but I haven't really got a friend anymore. It must be because I'm an intellectual. I expect people are in awe of me. Looked in my dictionary to find out what wanton means. It is not very nice. Monday, March the 23rd. Back to school, worse luck. We had domestic science today. We did baked potatoes in the oven with cheese filling. My potatoes were bigger than anyone else's, so they weren't properly cooked by the time the lesson ended, so I finished them off at Bert Baxter's. He wanted to see Blossom again, which was a bit of a drag because he takes so long to walk anywhere, but we went. Anything is better than doing maths at school. Bert took his horse brushes with him and gave Blossom a good clean. She was shining like a conker by the time he'd finished. Bert got out of breath, so he sat on the scrap car and had a woodbine. Then we walked back to Bert's house. Sabre is in a better temper since he got his new kennel, and Bert's house is in a better condition as a result of Sabre being outside. Bert told me that the social worker thought he ought to go into an old people's home where he can be properly looked after. Bert doesn't want to. He told a lie to the social worker. He said his grandson came in every day and looked after him. The social worker is going to check up, so I could be in trouble for impersonation. I don't know how much more worry I can take. Tuesday, March the 24th. Late last night I saw my mother and Mr. Lucas going out in Mr. Lucas's car. They went somewhere special because my mother was wearing a boiler suit with sequins. She did look a bit wanton. Mr. Lucas was wearing his best suit and he had a lot of gold jewellery on. For an old person, he certainly knows how to dress. If my father took more care of his appearance, none of this would have happened. It stands to reason that any woman would prefer a man to wear a suit and a lot of gold jewellery to one like my father, who hardly ever shaves and wears old clothes and no jewellery. I am going to stay awake and find out what time my mother comes home. Midnight. Mother still not home. 2 a.m. No sign of my mother. Wednesday, March the 25th. Annunciation of B.V. Mary. Fell asleep, so don't know what time my mother got home. My father said she had gone to the insurance firm's Christmas dinner and dance. In March? Come off it, Dad. I was not born yesterday. We had swimming in games today. The water was freezing cold, and so were the changing cubicles. I will try to get athlete's foot so that I don't have to go next week. Thursday, March the 26th. Barry Kent has been done by the police for riding a bike without a rear light. I hope he gets sent to a detention centre. A short, sharp shock will do him good. Friday, March the 27th. Pandora and Nigel have split up. It is all round the school. This is the best news I have had for ages. I am reading Madame Bovary by another frog writer. Saturday, March the 28th. Last quarter. Nigel has just left. He is heartbroken. I tried to comfort him. I said that there are plenty more pebbles on the beach and fish in the sea, but he was much too upset to listen. I told him about my suspicions about my mother and Mr. Lucas, and he said that it had been going on for a long while. Everybody knew except me and my father. We had a long talk about racing bikes. Then Nigel went home to think about Pandora. It is Mother's Day tomorrow. I am in two minds about whether to buy her something or not. I have only got 68 pence. Sunday, March the 29th. 4th in Lent, Mothering Sunday. My father gave me £3 last night. He said, "Get your mother something decent, son. It could be the last time." I certainly wasn't going all the way into town for her, so I went to Mr. Cherry's and bought a box of black magic and a card saying, "To a wonderful mother." Card manufacturers must think that all mothers are wonderful, because every single card has "wonderful" written on it somewhere. I felt like crossing "wonderful" out and putting "wanton" in its place, but I didn't. I signed it, "From your son, Adrian." I gave it to her this morning. She said, "Adrian, you shouldn't have." She was right, I shouldn't have. Must stop now. My mother has arranged what she called a civilized meeting. Mr. Lucas is going to be there. Naturally, I am not invited. I'm going to listen at the door. Monday, March the 30th. A terrible thing happened last night. My father and Mr. Lucas had a fight in the front garden. The whole street came outside to watch. My mother tried to separate them, but they both told her to keep out of it. Mr. O'Leary tried to help my father. He kept shouting, "Give the smarmy bugger one for me, George." Mrs. O'Leary was shouting horrible things at my mother. By the sounds of things, she had been watching my mother's movements since Christmas. The civilized meeting broke up at about 5 o'clock, when my father found out how long my mother and Mr. Lucas had been in love. They had another civilized meeting at about 7 o'clock, but when my mother disclosed that she was leaving for Sheffield with Mr. Lucas, my father became uncivilized and started fighting. Mr. Lucas ran into the garden, but my father rugby tackled him by the laurel bush, and the fight broke out again. It was quite exciting, really. I had a good view from my bedroom window. Mrs. O'Leary said, "'Tis the child I feel sorry for," and all the people looked up and saw me. So I looked especially sad. I expect the experience will give me a trauma at some stage in the future. I'm all right at the moment, but you never know. Tuesday, March 31st. My mother has gone to Sheffield with Mr. Lucas. She had to drive because Mr. Lucas couldn't see out of his black eyes. I have informed the school secretary of my mother's desertion. She was very kind and gave me a form to give to my father. It is for free school dinners. We are now a single-parent family. Nigel has asked Barry Kent to stop menacing me for a few weeks. Barry Kent said he would think about it.